Cricket Life Stories with me, Neel Khagram. Today we're joined by Jonathan Agnew. How's things going?
Well, it's okay. It's a funny old time, isn't it? Welcome to my commentary box, which is basically at home these days. And we're working off TV and so on, which is a rather strange experience. But at least cricket's being played, even if we can't actually go there and be there and report on it ourselves. But let's hope that there's light at the end of this rather long tunnel.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So let's take it all the way back with yourself. So talk us through your earliest memories of the sport, how you got into it, and your earliest influences.
Well, my earliest memory, it comes from my dad, really. My dad was a keen cricketer. He was a farmer, and he loved cricket. It was always on in the house, telly. So I remember I was sort of shutting myself away for all 5 days of a test match, closing the curtains and just sitting and watching those games, and just fall in love with cricket. Really, I had a brother who's 2 years younger than me, so we used to go out and play. Once the games had finished on the telly, and it's weird how things go around, because a number of those people actually became very good friends. Ray Illingworth was my first captain. He was captain of England when I really started to get into cricket. Jeff Boycott, of course, colleague, very close friend. John Snow, all these people, Derek Underwood, I could list them all off as all being people who I came to know and become friends with. So it's funny how, while I was a kid and they were playing cricket, actually, you also catch up with one another in a way, don't you? So the age gap decreases a bit. And so that's what happened. That's what happened with me. And my dad was great. He never really pushed me. He took me, the big break really was he took me for some coaching at Alf Gover's cricket school in Wandsworth when I was 16, it was my 16th birthday present. And Alf, the old fast bowler, of course, was connected with Surrey. He liked what he saw. So he got me a trial at Surrey. And I had 2 years there, or sort of summer holidays, really, because I was still at school, which was a very good experience on the field. Off the field, I have to admit, I didn't like it at all. They weren't my cup of tea. I was a country boy. And I didn't really get into sort of London life in the way that Surrey did things. So that's why I then moved to Leicestershire. I had 13 very happy years.
How did you find that experience with Surrey in terms of you being a youngster, trying to make your way in the game, playing with established pros perhaps that are fighting for their contracts, that kind of environment? Did you find it a bit dog eat dog as a youngster?
No, it was poor. It was a very poor atmosphere at the Oval. I think it's only fairly recently. I think Alex Stewart's got to grips with it and got the place sorted out. But it wasn't a place for a 16-year-old country boy. I think my parents are very brave in sending me down there to London. We didn't know anybody. But no, it was exactly that, a case of sort of older players clinging to their jobs, and there was no place for youngsters. And I really didn't enjoy it at all. I went back to school, and Maurice Hallam was my coach at Uppingham. And I said, I love cricket, but if that is what professional cricket is, I don't want anything more to do with it. And that's why he then connected me with Leicestershire, which is an entirely different experience. So no, you live and learn. I learned a bit from being down there at the Oval, but I was glad to get out of it.
Yeah, talk us through the move to Leicester. You got picked up on the back of some impressive school performances.
Well, they were, but never actually personally, because Mike Turner, who was the boss at Leicester, he came to see me play 3 times in 1978. And each time it rained, so never actually saw me bowl. But he took Maurice's word for it, Maurice Hallam, and so he signed me anyway. And within about a month, I'd think, I was playing in the first 11 because there were some injuries. And so suddenly I was thrust into my first game was against Lancashire, in fact, at Grace Road. And Lancashire were my heroes. I was from Cheshire originally. And so that side, including David Lloyd, who was my first wicket, of course, in my first over, but they were my heroes. And I was playing against people whose photos I'd have on my bedroom wall. It was an amazing, rather surreal experience. Clive Lloyd playing, it was Colin Croft. Thank God I didn't have to face him. Little schoolboy pads and stuff I was putting on. There's Croft roaring in down the hill. But the whole atmosphere at Leicester was very different. And I say Ray Illingworth as captain, first of all, I just have massive admiration for. Then Ken Higgs as the coach, then David Gower became captain. And when he wasn't around, Peter Willey was captain. They were very different, and Will was very tough and did a lot for me, actually, really hardened me up, got me in the England side, along with helps from Andy Roberts, who I opened the bowling with for a couple of years. So my all-round Leicester experience was a really very happy one, and I was lucky to make that move.
Yeah, at the end of that, your debut season, you got the opportunity to go down to Australia. Talk us through that moment, how that came about. You played a youth test as well, and also the opportunity to net with the England side as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, but there was something called the Whitbread Scholarship that was, I mean, there was bear in mind in those days, there were no 12-month contracts. So come early September, you were given your P60 and a reporting back date of sometime in April, and that was it. And you were left to your own devices for the winter, which was pretty tricky, really. But there was this scheme called the Whitbread Scholarship, sponsored by the brewery. Colin Cowdrey actually was sort of the front man of it. And on the back of, I played 3 or 4 games at the end of that summer anyway. And made a bit of an impression, and so that's how I got picked for that Whitbread Scholarship. And when Ian Botham, I think, had gone the year before, it was for promising young cricketers, But I just left boarding school, and I'd been there for 10 years. I was 18, and I'd never really sort of been free before. So I arrived in Australia, not knowing anybody, 18 years old. There's a fellow called Frank who picked me up at Melbourne Airport, and it was only some time later I discovered it was Frank Tyson, whose house I lived in for some weeks before I got moved on to a club. But again, that was a good experience. I mean, I wish I'd done it a couple of years later, and I wish there'd been a bit more sort of control over what I did, because there was no sort of training schemes or so on. But I did net with England, which was a bit traumatic, because I managed to hit Mike Brearley, who was the captain, in the nets over the eye, which almost knocked him out of the Boxing Day test. Just went off a length. The nets were wet. So that was a bit of an interesting one. And yes, Young England then came over. So, the early years were quite busy. There was a lot going on. And I was, I had some injuries. I think when you're that age and you're growing and you're trying to bowl fast, and I was very thin. And there was no sort of model, no routine. I mean, these days I'd have been on some sort of pathway that would have got me in the gym and got me doing things. That never happened, really. So, that's how it was in those days. But I did make a good early impression, but then it kind of tailed off a little bit. And then around about 83, I suppose, I got in the side full time. And that was when my career kind of took off, really.
Were you big back then on the technical aspects of bowling? Or was it just a case of just the science? There was no real science behind it. It was just get the overs in, repetition. Obviously, in the modern game now, there's a lot of analysis done of a fast bowler.
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there was none. I mean, the first time I saw myself bowl on film was when I played for England, and I watched the highlights, and I was a bit surprised how thin I was, and also everything was a surprise. My action, I mean, everything was. I'd never seen it before, so I was relying a lot on Ken Higgs, who was our coach, who was a very fine bowler, of course. When Andy Roberts came to Leicestershire, I opened the bowling with him for a couple of years, and that did me a huge amount of good, because although Andy was kind of slightly over the hill then, he won't mind me saying that, he was just brilliant at passing on advice. And I travelled in his car quite a lot, so we talked a lot. And I remember him saying to me halfway through 1984, "You'll play for England this year." I thought, "You really think?" So he was very helpful. But no, it was more a case of sort of working things out for yourself, really. And then you look at the depth of preparation and the level of conversation. I mean, I talk about bowling a lot with Stuart Broad, because he lives very local to me and I see a lot of him. And it is rather a different language now in the way they talk. I think they're much more of a unit now than we were, certainly in the England side, because when I played, I didn't know half the team. And you turned up the day before a test match. You didn't know if you were playing or not. And there was usually a rather relaxed dinner the night before, which you went through a few tactics. And that was it. And off you went. And the trouble was that you knew that if you didn't perform immediately, you're going to be out. Which was a good thing in some ways, because it meant that county cricket was very competitive, and that you knew within county cricket, I knew if I got wickets this week, I might play for England next. So that was a very strong motivator. But the downside of that was when he did get in the England side, if you didn't perform straight away, you were out because the fellow just taking some wickets in county cricket would be in. So I think there was quite a lot of sort of protectionism going on, not selfishness necessarily, but I mean, you did have to think a lot about your own game in those days and how well you were doing. That doesn't happen now. They are much more of a unit now, central contracts, they all know each other very well. And so while you could argue it's a bit cozy, especially for the batsmen who very rarely seem to get dropped, it's always the bowlers. But I think it's a much healthier environment around that England side now, except, of course, it is more difficult for county players to get into, to break in now, which is a shame.
You mentioned 1984. I was reading about some stats. I think 84 wickets at 28. What, looking at when you reflect back, what do you think clicked for you that year?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because my career was in sort of two parts, really. That was the part where I was a fast bowler. I just ran in and bowled quickly. I did swing the ball, but I just ran in and bowled fast. And then after that, after I played for England, I got injured, actually. I got injured and I did a side muscle, and Peter Willey wanted me to play anyway. So I bowled for short or run, bowled a reduced speed. I think I got 6 wickets. I was playing Somerset. And it just seemed to be more comfortable for my body and so on to do it. I was a better bowler, actually. So in that 84, yeah, I mean, obviously I bowled all right, and to take those wickets and get picked. But I think I was a better bowler in the second half of my career when I didn't play for England than the first part of my career when I did. And it's always a bit frustrating. I'd love to have had another chance. Whether I was, if I'm being honest, whether I was actually good enough, I don't know, because it is a big step up. And I look at players now as part of my job, and you try and analyse how good those players are in a very short space of time. Is Ben Stokes or Sam Curran or whatever. You do have to make some quite instant decisions, and you see people like those two I just mentioned who just sort of take Test cricket like a duck to water. And then there are others, and I was one of them, who it takes longer. And my career was so fragmented, the 3 tests that I played on, that you had no real opportunity to feel that you belonged in the England side at all. But then on the other hand, whether I actually fully believed that I was good enough to be there was possibly an issue as well. But I'd have loved the chance. When I was taking a stack of wickets in 87 and 88 and so on, I'd have loved the chance to play for England again then, because I was a much better bowler.
Your introduction into the England team couldn't have been more daunting. That great West Indies side, the Blackwash series, came in the 5th Test match.
Yes,
you got the call. What were you thinking?
There have been gentler introductions, I think. I mean, the main thing I remember about that was that the batsmen were just shot. Really, they just faced this relentless barrage of fast bowling. It was hostile, brutal, and they'd kind of gone over the hill. Really, they were blown, really. And I didn't know until the morning of the game that I was playing. And then suddenly, you've got your stuff, and you're out there bowling, and you're bowling at these great players. So the first innings, it was all right, but I didn't get a wicket in the first innings. Jellison bowled well, actually. In fact, we had quite a good Test match until the second innings, because we were more or less level terms, I think, at the end of the first innings. And then, I got Richards and Greenwich, and so they were about 50 for 3. But as was the way with them, someone came to the rescue, and it was Desmond Haynes, who'd hardly scored a run all series. He got 100. And Clive Lloyd got some. And then in the second innings, I remember sitting there back at the Oval, of course, where I'd started as a kid. So sitting in that same dressing room, watching Michael Holding going off his long run, off that full run, and listening to the noise of the crowd, and the West Indians there clanking their cans and blowing their whistles. And yeah, it was a very intimidating experience. I remember walking out of bat at the end. Yeah, I think who was bowling? Joel Garner and Malcolm Marshall, these guys. It was, it was pretty daunting. But I mean, they were a great side. I feel very privileged to have played against them. Viv and I still josh a bit about the LBW. He reckons it wasn't out. I think he might have. I think it might have been an umpire's call around about height and leg stump, if I'm honest. But we still josh about that, and a lot of those men are now friends of mine. Michael Holding, a very close friend of mine. Clive Lloyd, I see around a lot. Gordon Greenwich, I've rubbed shoulders with, and so on. So, dear Malcolm Marshall was a good friend. So it's funny how even when it was, it was pretty tough, intimidating. They're just doing their jobs on the field, and they were brilliant at it.
Do you think you got backed in terms of? Do you think you deserved a few extra Test matches? You mentioned confidence earlier, but 3 Test matches. You played 3 ODIs as well. How did you reflect back on that period?
Well, it's funny because I got good people out. The 4 Test victims I got. Greenwich, Richards, Ranatunga, and Aravinda de Silva are pretty decent. If you look at the one-day international wickets, Sunil Gavaskar, I bowled him. I got good people out. I was naturally quite an attacking bowler, so maybe a bit more expensive, perhaps. I mean, the test figures are horrible because I didn't get enough wickets, and I bowled a lot in that Sri Lanka Test match. But I was not someone like Stewart or Jimmy Anderson just running up and bowling maiden after maiden. This wasn't the way that I bowled. I did tend to bowl a more attacking length, try to swing the ball. So I was a little more expensive perhaps, but I did get good people out. But I think, if I'm honest, if I were me now, looking at me the player, I might have considered that I'd had a chance, and probably. And there were so many good bowlers around. That was the problem. English county cricket then had a lot of good opening bowlers, and because of the system that I mentioned, where it wasn't quite a rotation, but there was a much more chance of everyone being picked at some time or other. Once you had your turn, you're down to the bottom of the queue, really. So, from Gladstone Small, Neil Radford, Neil Foster, Graham Dilly. I mean, you can just go through a list of really good English fast bowlers. Norman Cowans, Neil Williams. You can just keep Greg Thomas. You can list virtually every county had quality fast bowlers, born and bred, and so there were a lot of us around. So you had to take your chance.
And when you went back to county cricket in the winter, did you have a forward plan in your mind that you wanted to go into the media? In 1987, you started working for BBC Leicester alongside John Rawling, who many in the boxing world will know. He's the face of boxing as well.
Yeah, well, John's a very good friend of mine, and yes, he was a sports producer at Radio Leicester. And as I mentioned earlier, there were no jobs. There were no 12-month contracts, so you had to find work. And I'd driven a lorry, I'd made windows in a window factory. All sort of kind of dead end jobs, really, because you were going to play cricket again in April, so not exactly career moves. But then John said to me one September, it was 87. He said, "What are you doing this winter?" I said, "John, I really don't know." And so he said, "Well, come along and give radio a go." He said, "I think you'll like it. I think you're a nice voice for it. I think you'll be good at it. Come and give it a go." He said, "Well, I don't pay you anything, but at least you'll get some experience." And local radio being what it was, certainly in those days, again, you were thrown in at the deep end for everything. So, it wasn't long before presenting the Saturday afternoon program. So, real proper presentation and production, and you got tapes going of football matches on Radio 2 that you had a little squad of people turning around and playing. And it was, it was brilliant, really. It was superb experience. So I had 3 years of that, and yeah, I mean, I fell in love with radio, and it did do my playing career some good, I think, because I realised there was life outside cricket. But the problem was that I also did some work for the Today newspaper, so that was the first colour paper as tabloid, and they were brilliant with me as well. So what they did in that same time, the sports editor called Mike Crouch, he would send me off to go and report on just about every sport you could imagine, from surfing to skiing, from Aussie rules to all of these things, learning how to write. Rugby, I always did the number 2 rugby international. So if it was England, Scotland, I would be doing Wales, France or something, learning how to write and report. And given I did it for a tabloid, because they then asked me, they gave me a bit of an ultimatum really to be their cricket correspondent, which I had to take immediately in 1990. I was only 30, but I knew by then I wasn't going to play for England again, and so that was my main motivator for playing cricket. And so I took the plunge really, and so I became the Today newspaper's cricket correspondent in 1990. And on that tour of Australia, Chris Martin-Jenkins left the BBC, so that job became vacant. And that's the one I still have now. So I applied for that at the end of that tour in spring of 1991, and that's what I've been ever since. In fact, this is the first winter since that I haven't been away covering cricket since that 1990 tour, which is remarkable, really.
Any tips and advice for youngsters wanting to get into radio, get into cricket broadcasting? Is it just a case of trying to get any experience that you can, even if it's just work experience, non-paying, and just be open?
Well, that's what I think you're lucky these days. You've got everyone's got one of these. You've got a phone, so you can go along to a cricket match. It doesn't have to be a test match. Go along to a village green and just and commentate. Record yourself commentating. We never had. I mean, when I started doing radio, the instruments we had were sort of like this size, and carry over your shoulder, and you didn't own them. But now you've got a phone. What an easy way to learn how to commentate on the radio, learn how to do stuff to camera on the video, because that's what it is. I now do a lot of my reports, and a lot of work is actually done on my phone. So, you do have a bit of a head start, and you can email it around, you can get it out there. There are, platforms about in which you can put yourself, and you can just send an email to the producer of Test Match Special. Again, we couldn't do that. We couldn't. There's no way I would know if Peter Baxter then would ever get there wasn't such a thing as email, so I don't know how I would have communicated with him and sent him a tape or a clip of me commentating. But you can do that to Adam Mountford, and if he's got time, he'll listen to it, and suddenly you might go, oh, okay. So I mean, that's a good way to start, I think. And it's a good thing to do it by yourself. I mean, I think it's become more of the modern way to lean a lot on the expert summariser sitting beside you, which I think rather disturbs the flow. I mean, the commentator has to describe the scene and has to be able to do it in a relaxed, calm way, without fearing that the fellow sitting next to him is going to come diving in with some sort of point about something. The commentator. I mean, in the old days when I started, the commentator really commentated for the whole over. And they would stop, well, there we go, it's the over, and it's 63 for 1. And that would be the cue for Fred Truman or Trevor Bailey or whoever it may be to give his thoughts on the over. I think we're a bit more relaxed than that now, and I think that's probably a good thing. But that was where it came from. So somewhere in between the two, I would feel comfortable with, in that I want to be able to describe things, get a thought in your head that sometimes you need to retain, or at least, even if you're commentating and you're telling a story about something, and then something happens, well, you've got to park it. You park the story, even for 10 minutes. You can always go back to it. Oh, I was like, oh yes, I was telling about so and so. You can always come back to it, but you need to have that really relaxed way of being able to deliver what it is that you want to say, because that's what the audience likes. They're with you for 7 hours or so, if they're listening all day. So they don't want somebody sort of jabbering away like a jackhammer. You've got to have a fairly easy delivery and just be that sort of that background noise for much of the time.
Did you have any training when it came to, as you mentioned, the delivery of, because you are the voice of TMS? Did you have any training in terms of emphasis on certain words, that kind of thing?
No, nothing.
Natural talent.
No. Well, you can call it that. I mean, it's just, I think it's just something. I mean, I think everybody has something they can do, and it's just something that I can do. I was lucky. I did have 3 years working with Brian Johnston, of course, who was a sort of brilliant communicator, who, of course, really created the tone of Test Match Special. Really, his style, which is very similar. We were very similar. I mean, he was 50 years older than me. He's like my granddad. But we did share this silly sense of humour, and we just kind of connected really. And so I found it very easy to learn from him by just watching and listening to him. So he never sat me down and said, you should do this or try doing that. No one's ever done that. Perhaps there could have been a bit more feedback along the way, but there really wasn't any. You've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to listen back, although it's often quite a tough thing to do, to listen back to yourself, especially when you start, because you're always a bit surprised by how you sound to begin with. But as long as you're honest, say, well, that wasn't very good, and I should have done that better. And the person who helped me with, because of course the whole presentation of Test Match Special is more than just commentating on cricket, but it's the interviews that you do, the lunch breaks and so on, 40-minute interviews with people. And so Michael Parkinson's helped me a lot with that, because that's, of course, is something that he did so brilliantly. And I contacted him. I know Michael pretty well, actually. He's always been a very good supporter of mine. And he would listen, and then he would send me a few notes and, a few points here or there. The best bit of advice he ever gave me, and it's great advice, is if you're interviewing somebody, and it's often especially politicians who don't want to give much away, their first reaction is to give a fairly bland first answer. And you think, I'm sure I can get a bit more than that, but you don't want to make it obvious that you're digging with another question or something. And it's just one word. You say, really? And if you say that to somebody who's given you an answer, that they've got to give you some more. And it's the easiest little tip, but that was one of Michael's. And so I do that a lot. Really? Oh yeah, because so you get an expanded answer. So that's a little tip. I'm happy to pass that one on, because Michael did to me.
Talk us through at the early stage of your stint with TMS. You also came back for one game for Leicester in the semi-final. Talk us through how that all came about, that period.
Yeah, well, that was that time, because I was quite young. So I was 32. I hadn't played for 2 years. And Leicestershire were having a good run in the NatWest. That was the 60 over tournament at the time. And there was an injury crisis. And it was sort of building up a bit to this question of whether I was going to play or not. And Leicester were due to play Essex in the semi-final. And of course, Graham Gooch was Essex and England captain at the time. I remember him ribbing me a bit. We were at Trent Bridge, and I was interviewing him before a Test match. And he's saying, "You're going to play on Tuesday then, Aggie?" I said, "Well, I don't know, Graham." I'm going to smack you around the ground, all that sort of stuff that Graham would say, And I remember going along the day before the match. I hadn't bowled a ball for 2 years, but I was only 32, to be fair. However, I remember turning up, and Nigel Bryars was captain of Leicestershire by then. I said, "Look, Nigel," I said, "are you sure about this?" He said, "Look," he said, "if you go 0 for 100 and you drop 3 catches, I still want you to have played." See, we've got nobody. So I said, fine. So on those terms, so I went into the nets and had really quite a short bowl, because I knew I was going to be stiff the next day. Took a few catches. And by the time I came on, thank goodness, Graham was out. Winston Benjamin had got him out. And I remember my first ball, it was a big match. It was, full house and semi-final. And my first ball was a wide half volley. Can't remember who at now. Might have been Nasser. Whoever it was really laced it, drove it hard to point. And Winston Benjamin fielded it brilliantly. It would have been 4. Dived, stopped, no run. And that was it. That made the difference. I bowled with 12 overs for about 30, got a wicket. Couldn't move the next day. And we won. It was one of those times where things went well. You know what I mean? When you think it's not going to go well for me here. If that ball had gone for 4, that first ball, I think I'd have gone around the park. Because Winston stopped it. And the funny thing was that we got to the final then, and I'm up in the commentary box at Lord's, and I can see Nigel running across the ground, waving at me, saying, come down. I went down to the dressing room, and again, someone had ripped their back in the nets. Would he play? I said, no. No, because I did it and I knew it wouldn't work again. I haven't got any kit. I've come to commentate. I haven't got any, I've got any gear. So I didn't play in the final, but they did try to get me to. But I got away with the semi, and that was enough.
And then from a skill set point of view, what are the main differences working in radio and then TV? So obviously, I guess as I
Well,
mentioned,
yeah. I mean,
also
they're entirely
TNA,
different.
but you've also had you've also presented, for example, the 1999 World Cup as well. You were the presenter on TV as well. So,
Yeah.
what are the fundamental differences from your
Oh,
perspective?
it's a lot. I mean, I think you know which one you are, whether you're a natural radio person or a natural TV person. I mean, you are one of the two, I think. But in most cases, I mean, I think the most striking exception would be Tony Cozier, who was just brilliant at both. But they're entirely different. And talking to time, yeah, you do it on the radio, of course. You have to talk to junctions and pips and all that sort of stuff. But you can do it with a stopwatch in your hand. You can see the hand going around. So, it takes a bit of practice, obviously. But you can see it. But on the telly, it's that horrible robotic voice in your earpiece, and amongst everything else that's going on as well that you're hearing. And that's hard, And I was lucky in the World Cup. I had Richie Benno to help me. And in the end, I mean, when the count started, I'd ask him a question and he would stop at 8 seconds, leaving me 7 seconds to say goodbye. So thank you, Richie. That's great. There we go. Good win today for West Indies. Tomorrow, Richie and I are off to Birmingham to watch England against Pakistan on 10:30. We'll see you then. Goodbye. 0. And that's how I got through doing the World Cup, thanks to Richie Benno. I like doing TV. I like commentating on TV to an extent, but it's very limited. You're limited to what's on the screen. They're made to talk too much these days. Again, those lovely early years of just sitting and watching in my blacked out sitting room at home. You had Richie and Jim Laker and Peter West and co, who really didn't say very much. But now, especially because it's commercials coming in at end of overs and stuff, you've got they have to cram stuff in during the over itself. It just means that it's difficult, but they are often saying the obvious because you can only say what's on the screen, and there's only so many ways to say, well, that's gone for 4 or something. It's whereas on the radio you can ham it up a little bit, because you are, it is a bit of a performance. For 20 minutes you're driving the program. You're the producer, you're the presenter, you're the editor, you're everything, because you are in charge of what's going out on the radio. So, sometimes you get it wrong. Of course you do. It's live, it's unscripted, and so at times you don't quite get it right, perhaps. But I'd like to think that most of the time, if you're good at what you do, you get more right than not. Little things just come in your mind, and you just think, okay, I'll log that away for another time, or next time Jeffrey comes on, I'm going to do him on this or something. So. It is spontaneous. Radio is spontaneous, and you've got the opportunity to really go for it. Not in a brash, over the top sort of a way, but in terms of embellishment and description and colour and really bringing the listener there. He or she can't be there in most cases. Some are blind, and so. It's a question of really making them feel that they're there, that they can see it. That's what our job is. And so anything that you can add to the obvious or the mundane is clearly of benefit.
There's been some memorable moments, some funny moments. Talk us through that leg over moment for those that may not know about it. Talk us through that.
Well, I'd be surprised if everyone hasn't heard it by now. What was it? 30 years ago. That was more than that. 31 years ago. So, yeah, that was my first year. Ian Botham didn't get his leg over, and because it was Ian, and Ian back in the side, and Brian Johnston having this ridiculous sense of humour that we both, double entendre, that we both share. Really, it just hit home at the right moment as far as Brian was concerned. It just floored him. So, that was a thoroughly spontaneous minute and a half of madness in which two people were really unable to speak through genuine corpsing, and sometimes it can sound a bit false, like the corpse, people are laughing, but this one was just so totally genuine. And what do? You feel like it's sort of an eruption deep in your stomach, because it just has to come out, and you can't stop it. You can't stop it. So it has to go, and it's you're sort of clinging to try and stop it, and then boom, out it goes. So, I mean, that's been played everywhere. It's been used as an example of sort of how not to deal with corpsing when you're on stage for RADA actors and all these. I mean, it's been used in all sorts of ways, but more than anything, it actually just makes people laugh. It's used at weddings, at funerals. And you know, the timing was great for me. I might as well be honest about it. I mean, the leg over made me, really. You know, it sounds silly to think of that, but it was my first year. I think radio listeners take a bit of time to get used to a new voice. They sort of like familiarity and routine, and so when you got a new person there, they think, "Oh, who's this bloke? No, what's he like?" And because Brian and I between us produced that, you know, that ridiculous comedy moment, I think it certainly helped you know, sort of bring the barriers down as far as I was concerned. I know it did. So, you know, I'll always be grateful to the leg over. Whenever I hear it, it makes me chuckle, sometimes more than others. But of course, I'm the lucky one, and all the millions of people who have heard it and laughed at it, I've actually, you know, I've actually got Brian sitting here beside me. I can see him. You know, I can reach out and touch him, because only he and I really shared it.
There's also been some moving moments as well. A couple of years ago, a son wrote in that letter about his father with dementia. Do you want to talk through that moment as well?
That's an example of something in this poor fellow's life that sort of sparked up a bit of recognition. Now, they use it quite a lot with music for dementia patients, and this old boy was dying, you know, and he was in a demented sort of state. And so, yes, his son took the radio in, and they played Test Match Special, and for a day, he was a different man. You know, they sat there and listened. It was Wokes, I think, scoring his 100 at Lord's, and they, excuse me, and they listened to the point where England won, and that was basically where he closed his eyes and died. So, yeah, I mean, when you're sitting there and you're just commentating, you're not really aware of where you're going. I mean, you know, you're going all around the world, but you can't really, you're not really being specific as to where and who and in what circumstance people are listening. Although you get emails, you know, a lot of maternity wards have us on, apparently. You know, for fathers pacing about and sitting there anxiously, gripping wife's hand while she's giving birth. They've got the cricket on. That happens quite a lot. A lot of students revising have it on a lot. Of course, car journeys and so on. But I mean, people say, "Oh, you know, who do you imagine you're talking to? Is it your mum or something?" I don't. I'm commenting to myself. You know, you got your headphones on, and I just concentrate on putting my voice against the crowd when there is one. Then you sort of set yourself in terms of a melody against that sort of orchestral backing, if you like. So you try and get the pitch right and the tone right and the volume right, and you can set yourself against it. It is quite musical, and away you go, and you hope that people enjoy it.
And when you reflect back so far, what has been the most memorable matches that you've commentated on? Summer of
Ben Stokes. I mean, the Ben Stokes Headingley. I'll never see anything like that again. It was a ridiculous innings. It was just on a completely different level. Even for Ben, I suggest. Yeah, it was something happened that morning for Ben, and he just touched genius. And it was a very modern innings. You know, there's so many just breathtaking shots, courage of it, again, born probably through 2020 experience, I would think. Be able to cope with that sort of pressure. I mean, the Ashes were going to be lost. Poor old Jack Leach at the other end, you know, hanging on there grimly. And then Cummins coming in and bowling, and bang, he just leathered that one through the covers. And I was with Alistair Cook, who said that's the greatest innings ever played by an Englishman. And Alistair played a few, and I don't think you can get any greater compliment than that. So there's the World Cup final. I mean, it was a ridiculous summer, wasn't it? But there have been others, winning the Ashes in Australia, 2010-11. I really enjoyed that. England winning in India, very rarely done. 2012, that tour when Kevin Pietersen played brilliant innings at Mumbai and Alistair Cook. So there, you can sort of pick moments. The West Indies in the good old days, if you can say that, of crowds and fast bowlers and the atmosphere and the colour and the noise and the music. Loved all that. There's just there's so much to look back on. I've been incredibly lucky, and I say it's been very strange this winter to not to have had any of that. And I've missed it, after 30 odd years on the road. And it is, you do give a lot in terms of family life to a job like this. Every other Christmas, kids' birthdays, months away from home, all of that. 31 years of doing it is certainly more than most, I would suggest. And I think most people would do a circuit or two, and then maybe their families would insist that they did something else. That happens quite a lot. But I've been incredibly lucky. Emma's a journalist, and she understands. And with the kids growing up, she can now come away on tours as well. So we make time for ourselves on those tours. And so it works. It works well. But I'll be glad when we get back to touring again, and I'll be sad when it's all over.
And just to end on, how do you view the state of the game in England at the moment? Test cricket in this country, do you still see the fans seeing it as the pinnacle of the sport? Or it's got the 100 coming in, trying to tap into a new audience. How do you view the game in this country at the moment?
Well, I'll be very interested to see how the 100 does. I mean, that's, I think, I still believe is quite a gamble. The amount of money that's being spent on it, the following that T20 already has. I understand why the ECB want to do something. They want their own IPL or Big Bash or whatever it is. They've just been a bit slow, getting out of the blocks. So do you need 5 ball overs and timeouts and all this stuff? Well, time will tell with that one. I mean, I think that the biggest problem they're going to have is people identifying with the teams. I've got the Trent Rockets up the road here at Nottingham. Well, I'm from Leicester, and the one word that you do not use for Leicester people is Trent. It's a total turn-off. We hate Nottingham and the football teams and rugby teams and Trent Bridge, and Trent represents Nottingham, and Leicester folk, oh no. So that and Derby is the same. So somehow I don't know quite how they're going to work. That'll be interesting to persuade people that actually Nottingham's the place to go for this. But Test cricket, I think, well, thanks to Ben and others, I think that Test cricket is still regarded as being the pinnacle, and it's regarded as being special. Perhaps not quite so exclusively so as it was, because T20 is entertainment, and I enjoy watching T20 cricket. I do. There's not a huge amount I take away from a T20 game afterwards. I mean, Carlos Brathwaite's sixes, of course, that was the final, and that will always stick with you. But the games come and go so quickly, and some can sort of reignite if one team starts badly, but not in the same way that Test cricket does. And I think the one that probably has got the most to make up is probably the 50 over game. That you don't get so many tight finishes in that these days. It's become a bit formulaic. But no, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, and somehow they've got to keep Test cricket entertaining and interesting. Overrates really gets me. I cannot understand why the ICC hasn't done more about that. I just don't understand it. They just seem to have just shied away from that issue. I don't get it. World Test Championship, will that work? Again, time will tell. I'm not sure about that. The final, what happens if no one wins? What happens if it rains? There's some unanswerables there. And is the World Test Championship the driver for India and England at the moment? I don't think so. although either team could get there, but I don't know. I don't sense, but I'm not there, of course, but I don't sense that that's what everyone's talking about. So we shall see. But, you know, cricket has faced issues all the way down the line from the moment it started, and it's managed to keep evolving, and it's managed to still be miles away, as far as I'm concerned, the best sport that there is out there. It offers something to so many people, the different types of the different lengths of the game, participation, be an umpire, be a scorer, go and watch all those things that cricket offers so much, or just listen on the radio. It's been a huge part of lots of people's lives, and all I really want to do, but I think the bottom line of my job and what I want to do is just to keep introducing people to the game. And if people listen to me on the radio and think, oh, it sounds like a bit of fun, it sounds interesting, yeah, okay, I'll go and see what this is all about, then I think I'm doing my job. And people can agree with things that I say about aspects of the game, they can disagree, I really don't care. We all have our opinions, but I just want people to get into the game and to get the same sort of level of enjoyment out of it as I've had.
It's a great place to end it. Jonathan, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Fantastic.
Pleasure. No, thanks for having me on, and I hope, for the sake of all your viewers, that we get back to having crowds in cricket grounds again soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So Neel Khagram, Cricket Life Stories, Jonathan Agnew, thank you.